Good afternoon. End of a long week, at least in terms of the things that I had to deal with. But it was also a pretty dramatic week as to what was happening elsewhere. Let's return to one of those things, E. Jean Carroll. A fair update is that after Trump was found liable for sexual assault and basically then lying, defaming her, he went on the CNN Trump rally, in my opinion. I mean, they stocked it with Trump supporters. They didn't really give up much of a fight and so forth. But one of the interesting things about his appearance was he was asked about the decision holding him liable. And what did he do? He called Ms. Carroll a whack job. He said that what the court did was a rigged deal. He said he never met her, he never saw her. I don't know who that woman is, he said. This is what happens when you never say no to the miscreants, the criminals, the abusive, the bullies in our society. They think that there is no limitation on what they can do or say. For him, what is $5 million? Maybe it's pocket change. Maybe he thinks he'll never pay it. Maybe he thinks he'll settle after he's fought it through the courts forever. But one of the good news items is that Ms. Carroll is thinking of suing him for what he said on CNN, which is fair because we just had a jury decide that what he did before is what she said he did, and now he is decrying the truth of the verdict, the liability against him. Pretty remarkable, don't you think? There's a new kind of protest. Well, maybe it's not new, but it's been going on for a while, and there are some recent targets that this form of protest seems to be striking at. And it is those few people who are concerned about the environment, and legitimately so, but they've chosen as a method of expression going to smear the encasement or the paintings that we consider treasures, world treasures. Now, when I was a kid in New York, I could swear that I saw Degas' ballet dancer. I think it was a 14-year-old ballet dancer. And it looked like, and I believe it was, that the costume she was wearing was what a ballet dancer would have. And I have a small copy of this. It made such an impression on me when I was young. And I believe it was completed in 1881. Well, it's encased at a museum entirely surrounded in glass, and the protest against it for the environment was for people to smear black and red paint on the plastic encasement. Now there are other art objects. In the Louvre, of course, we have that smile, and we have other things, Van Gogh and so forth. And what they've been doing is they've been going out and compromising the viewing of these things. So the question is that protest or is it vandalism? I think it's vandalism. Now, what would be a good example of a protest that made sense? Okay, let's consider Manchin's view is he's going to object to any EPA appointments because he's upset about stricter controls on emissions. So, what would be a good connected protest? Well, you might stand outside of mine and talk about how many people died as a result of different lung diseases because of that mine. Or you might go to a place where the groundwater and the water has been compromised because of the mining tactics that they use. And you might consider the medical losses that people have in those circumstances. You might protest how much money Manchin gets from various people. And you might stand outside his house or by his boat, which he has down by the harbor in the District of Columbia. Now, some or all of these things may have been done, and that's a protest. But if I do a protest for a particular issue, I have to make the connection. So what is the connection between me defiling Degas' ballerina and the environment. Certainly Degas didn't foul the environment. He left us a thing of beauty, a memory of a gracious young dancer learning her art. So what does that have to do with anything? What it has to do with is I'm going to commit an act so outrageous that the first line will be, I committed that outrageous act and I defiled a statue when I was making this act. So you would hear my second message that I'm concerned about the environment. Why doesn't somebody do something about it? I agree that it is terribly frustrating, infuriating, how little governments will actually do as opposed to what they say. Now, the Washington Post today, on their editorial page, did decry the vandalism as such. And they said, oh, it's particularly irrelevant when Trump is doing so much about the environment. Well, stop the music there. Governments are not doing much, and sometimes they are far from enough of what they need to do, including their promises in various international treaties and so forth. So, yes, Biden has done some things. No doubt he was better than Trump, but let's not mix the two issues together. The accusation of vandalism stands on its own, and we don't need people compromising treasures from geniuses who created these works of art that lift our souls at a time when there are so many degrading, abusive, bullying people who do nothing, and when they do something hurtful and harmful. So, enough of this arbitrary, unconnected act of vandalism. That's not protest. There is protest, and protest should show a mental process that connects whatever you do and catching people's attention to the underlying issue. Okay, maybe that's only the way I think, but it is. I have another one, migrants. The migrant surge. Now, how many years have we had a question at the border of how to handle people applying for asylum? As long as I've been alive, I think. And it will continue. And what have we done to deal with that? Not very much. Now, we had a crisis when Trump came into office because of his bigotry and his name-calling of persons of Latin origin south of the border. And at one point, they asked for judges to volunteer. And I thought, well, okay, if I could be helpful, I would do that. So I sent in the information, and I never heard from them. This made me think, not so much personally, as why are we seeking judges on an emergency basis when we need them all the time? Why do we have makeshift places to hold people instead of erecting a building? And perhaps even rooms and showers and places where people can wait with dignity if that's what we have them do. We have how many millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, and we can't find people to take care of this problem? And the answer is, are we choosing not to have an answer to this problem? So let's put it this way. What if we had a building which was the immigration court for the border, and we populated it with judges? We have so many lawyers in America, and we have so many experts on immigration. Why aren't we using them? Then why don't we have a facility to hold people? And when I say hold them, I don't mean as prisoners. We send troops down there to control a crowd, but not to manage their ability to apply for asylum and be admitted or declined. That's the exercise. And they play the public for a fool when they say, oh, this is terrible. Well, if it is constantly, presently a problem, and it's not going to go away, why don't we establish both the infrastructure and the rules and regs to deal with it rather than ignore it? We have such complicated systems for everything else, and we can't find a complicated system for this. And it is, I suppose, because our leaders don't want to spend the money on it, don't care to have this system, don't actually want to deal with the problem. They want the problem. Maybe they get elected based on the problem. Maybe people point fingers at each other because of the problem. Maybe they don't want pushback from the people who endanger those who are escaping from Central America and other places where they can't live. And so they trek to America, right? The beacon of hope, the sign of liberty, the democracy that they don't have where they're coming from. So that's my thinking about the border. And is this going to change? You and I are more likely going to levitate than they're going to do anything sensible about this problem. So they're going to make it a political issue instead of a solution. I'm beginning to think that people run for office making promises they have no idea how to affect, nor do they care, because they just want to get elected. They don't care if they can cause these things to happen. And that's why there's a knife-edge difference in our government between those the voters support and those they don't support, because they don't trust either side. And we give plenty of notice to the fact that they're not trustworthy. And so that distrust is a cancer eating at our structure, and it's failing us. I do have one nice story about the environment. In Yellowstone, they wanted to start mining there. And so a group has spent $6.25 million so that they can stop any effort to mine the gold in Yellowstone National Park. You know, Teddy Roosevelt was so far ahead of his time on this, and there are great books written about his love of the environment, which is very interesting, and the circuitous route by which terrible times in his family, deaths, his image of himself, what he had to do to be stronger, better, all of these things led him to a position where he could do one of the things he really cared about. And I think it was the thing that saved him, binding himself with the environment. Oh yes, he killed animals, he did all sorts of things, but he also preserved, and he set a standard to preserve. And Yellowstone is part of that legacy from Teddy Roosevelt. So I think we have to, when we hear these statements, lies from our government, really, oh, it's a big problem down at the border, how are we going to handle it? Send down troops. What's going to happen? Well, plan ahead for, it's just, if we ran our lives the way the government is running our government, we would always be in chaos, we'd always be in trouble, we'd always be suffering. And that's pretty much what they're doing to our government. That's what they're doing to how we appear to the world. And that's just got to end. So, that's now, don't forget, Mother's Day. I took Holly out for lunch today. And early this morning I got a great 1 mile swim, which always sets me right. And those of you who swim know what I mean. And so I'm looking forward to a weekend, but I expect I'm going to have to work on a case for a client. Just things are happening, and I'll just have to deal with it. That's what I do. So I say have a good day, good evening, good Mother's Day, and I say goodbye from my cathedral of trees. Bye-bye.